I still remember that morning, the smell of coffee, the weak sunlight sneaking through the kitchen blinds, and the small excitement in my chest as I picked up the phone. It was supposed to be a happy day. My only son, Ethan, had promised to call and finally tell me the date of his wedding. But before he could answer, she did. "Hi, Mrs. Reynolds," came Lena's bright, sugar-coated voice. I smiled automatically. "Hello, sweetheart. I was just calling to ask, what time's the ceremony? I still need to find shoes to match my dress." There was a pause. Then she said it, casually, like it was nothing. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The world around me froze. The refrigerator's hum, the tick of the clock, the distant barking dog outside, everything turned into silence. Special people. My fingers went numb around the phone. I'm sorry. What did you say?" She laughed, a soft little giggle that sliced through me like glass. "Don't worry, Mom Reynolds. It was a small thing. Just family. We didn't want to bother anyone." Family. I wasn't family? For 3 years I'd paid their rent, bought every piece of furniture in their apartment, stocked their fridge when they had nothing to eat. But suddenly I wasn't special enough. I heard movement on the other end, Ethan's voice, low and guilty. "Mom, it was just a courthouse wedding, okay? Real simple." I tried to speak, but my throat had locked shut. In my mind, I saw the pale pink dress hanging in my closet, the one I had chosen for the big day. I'd spent $180 on it, thinking, how nice I'd look in the wedding pictures, pictures that would never exist. I ended the call somehow, though I don't remember pressing the button. For a long moment, I just stood there, holding the dead phone in my hand, staring at the kitchen table where I'd already wrapped their wedding present, an envelope with $1,000 cash and a handwritten note, "May your life together be filled with love." The words now felt like a joke written by a fool. That evening, I opened social media, something I rarely did. There they were, smiling in matching white outfits, standing under an arch of pink flowers. Lena's parents on one side, her 2 sisters on the other, everyone holding champagne glasses. Everyone but me. Each picture was a dagger. One caption said, "The happiest day of our lives, surrounded by family." My hand shook as I scrolled. There were dozens of likes, hearts, comments, and all I could think was, I had paid for that dress. I'd given her $700 last month for personal expenses, so in a way, I had funded my own exclusion. The following week, my phone rang. Lena's number. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me, the part that still remembered birthdays and bedtime stories, made me pick up.
"Mrs. Reynolds," she began in a nervous, high-pitched tone. "The rent is due. The landlord's threatening to evict us. You must have forgotten the transfer this month." I laughed quietly, a sound that didn't even feel like it came from me.
"Forgotten?" I repeated. "No, Lena, I didn't forget." There was silence. I could hear her breathing. "Look," she said finally, "Ethan's been stressed. Could you please just send it today? We'll pay you back after the honeymoon." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all the years I'd sacrificed, skipping vacations, canceling my own dentist appointments so they could live comfortably. And now this woman who'd shut me out of my own son's wedding was calling for money. "Lena," I said slowly, "didn't I warn you once that I only help special people?" There was a pause, then a small gasp. "Mrs. Reynolds, I don't understand." "You will," I said. And I hung up. It was the first time in years I'd hung up on anyone.
And God, it felt good. That night, I took out a notebook and began to write. Rent, $500 a month, x 36 months, FOS, $18,000. Groceries, $150 x 36 on $5,400. Furniture, gifts, emergencies, small loans, another $7,000. Total, $3,400, $30,000. Dollars gone, spent on a son who treated me like an ATM with feelings. I sat there for hours, tears running silently down my cheeks, realizing it wasn't just money I'd lost. It was respect. At midnight, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed for once. sleeping soundly. Because tomorrow, for the first time in 3 years, my money would stay mine. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window. I brewed coffee, made toast, and sat at the kitchen table. No calls, no messages. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was freedom. At 9:30, my phone finally buzzed. Ethan's name. I let it ring. Once, twice, then silence. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Lena this time. I smiled faintly and turned the phone face down. Out the window, the world looked new, same street, same trees, but something in me had shifted. I was done being invisible, and somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. 2 days passed before I heard Ethan's voice again. It wasn't over the phone this time. It was through my front door. He was shouting, "Mom, open up! We need to talk!" I froze mid-step, heart thudding. I hadn't seen him since the special people wedding. The voice that once said, "I love you." Mom now sounded hard, almost commanding. I walked to the door, hands trembling, and opened it. Ethan stood there in a suit, his tie crooked, his eyes wild with frustration. Behind him stood Lena, sunglasses, arms crossed, tapping her foot, and next to her, a man in a gray suit holding a black leather folder. "Mom," Ethan began, voice clipped. "This is Mr. Howard, our lawyer." I blinked. "Lawyer? For what?" Lena smiled that brittle little smile that never reached her eyes. "For your own good, Mrs. Reynolds. We're worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated, my voice icy. Ethan stepped forward. "You've been acting irrational, refusing calls, cutting transfers. Lena thinks, we think you might be depressed. Maybe not in your right mind." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "So now I'm crazy because I stopped paying your rent?" Lena looked at Mr. Howard, who opened his folder and began reading in a practiced tone. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is a formal notice. Given certain behaviors, your son and daughter-in-law have concerns about your mental and financial stability. They request temporary power of attorney to help manage your accounts and—" I raised my hand sharply. "Stop, right, there." The words came out colder than I'd expected. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You shut me out of your wedding, spend my money for years, and now you bring a lawyer to take control of the little I have left?" "Mom, please," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "We're just trying to help. You've always been generous, but lately you've been impulsive. You can't just stop everything without warning." I stared at him. The boy I'd raised alone after his father's death was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. "I don't need your help," I said quietly. "Mrs. Reynolds," the lawyer interrupted, "if we can't come to an understanding, I'll have to file this petition with the court. It's for your own safety." "Get out of my house." Ethan looked stunned. "Mom," I said, "get out." Lena stepped forward, her voice suddenly sharp. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to protect you and you're acting." "Like someone who finally learned to say no?" I snapped. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I pointed to the door. "Out, all of you." The lawyer looked at Ethan for instruction. Ethan hesitated, then muttered, "Let's go. She's not listening." Lena turned at the doorway, her lips curling. "You'll regret this, Mrs. Reynolds. Believe me, you will." I smiled thinly. "Not as much as you'll regret marrying my son." She flinched, color draining from her face, but didn't reply. When the door finally slammed shut, I leaned against it, my whole body shaking. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my old photo album. There was Ethan at age 6, grinning, frosting on his face, birthday candles melting behind him. Ethan at 10, holding my hand at the zoo. Ethan at 22, in a cap and gown, eyes bright with pride. And then the last photo, Ethan and Lena on Christmas, her arm linked through his, both smiling for the camera. I'd thought she was perfect for him. Now I realized she'd seen me not as family, but as funding. Tears slipped down my cheeks.
I wasn't just heartbroken, I was humiliated. But beneath that humiliation, something else began to stir. A quiet, determined anger. The next morning, I drove to my lawyer's office. A small, calm woman named Ruth Harper, who'd helped me with my husband's estate years ago. "Ruth," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to protect what's left of my money. My son and his wife are trying to take control of it." She listened carefully, taking notes. "They can't seize your assets unless a judge declares you incompetent," she said. "Do you have any medical issues they could use against you?" "None," I replied firmly. "And I have records to prove it." "Good," Ruth said, nodding. "We'll file for a preemptive protection order and move your savings to a separate account, in your name only. They'll never touch a dime." As I signed the papers, I felt something powerful inside me. Not revenge, not even anger. It was clarity. For years, I'd confused generosity with love. I'd given until I had nothing left, thinking it would make me matter. But love without respect isn't love at all. That night, the phone rang again. Ethan's number. I almost ignored it, but then I thought, no. This time, he needs to hear me, I answered. "Yes?" He sounded desperate. "Mom, please don't do this. Lena's been crying all day. You're pushing us away." I took a deep breath. "Ethan, let me ask you something. When was the last time you called me just to ask how I'm doing, without needing money?" Silence. "Never," I said quietly. "You see, son, I raised you to be kind, not to be greedy. But somewhere along the way, I failed. Maybe you'll learn now. Mom, goodbye, Ethan." And I hung up. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. I stood by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass like tiny rivers. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I was alone, yes. But I wasn't broken, because I finally understood. Some storms don't destroy you. They wash you clean. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, thick, official, stamped with the county seal. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. Filed by Ethan Reynolds and Lena Carter Reynolds. For a moment, I just stood there on my porch, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I laughed, quietly, bitterly. They were really doing it. They were taking their greed to court. The hearing was set for Friday, 10 a.m. Ruth, my lawyer, met me outside the courthouse steps. She wore a navy blazer and carried a calm, steady energy that instantly eased me. "They're going to try to make you look unstable," she warned. "Answer only what's asked, stay composed, and let me handle the rest." Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick, that peculiar mix of air conditioning and tension. Ethan and Lena sat across the aisle, whispering to each other. Ethan looked pale, nervous. Lena, however, looked radiant, perfectly composed, her hair in an elegant bun, a smug smile playing on her lips. The same smile she'd worn when she told me I wasn't special. I sat down, chin high. I wouldn't let them see me tremble. The judge entered, a tall man with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He glanced at the file, then at me. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "your son and daughter-in-law have filed a petition claiming you may no longer be capable of managing your finances. Do you have representation?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ruth said, standing. "I represent Mrs. Reynolds, and we intend to demonstrate that not only is she competent, but that this petition was filed with malicious intent." Lena's smile faltered slightly. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Their lawyer, Mr. Howard, began first. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "our clients have observed concerning behavior. Mrs. Reynolds abruptly cut off financial support, refused communication, and made impulsive banking decisions that could jeopardize her well-being." He gestured to Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "My mom's been different," Ethan began. "She's always been generous, but now she's angry, unpredictable. Lena and I are just worried she's not thinking clearly." Ruth leaned toward me. "He's nervous," she whispered. "He's rehearsed, but his guilt is showing." "Don't react." Then it was Lena's turn. She rose gracefully, clasping her hands like an actress about to perform. "Your Honor,
she began, her voice soft and trembling. I love Mrs. Reynolds like a mother, truly. But lately, she's been volatile. She called me names, hung up on us, and refused help. We just want her to be safe. Her fake tears glistened under the courtroom lights. The judge scribbled something down. Noted. Mrs. Reynolds, would you like to respond? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. My heart hammered, but my voice came out steady, colder than I expected. For 3 years I paid their rent, their groceries, their car repairs. I never missed a month. I even gave them money for their wedding, a wedding I wasn't invited to. Lena's head snapped up, eyes wide. Ethan looked down at his hands. I didn't cut them off out of confusion, I continued. I did it out of clarity. I finally realized they weren't treating me as family, only as funding. Ruth handed a folder to the judge. Bank statements, Your Honor. Every payment Mrs. Reynolds made over the past 3 years, including cash transfers and receipts. $3,400 in total, Mr. Howard frowned, flipping through his notes. The judge glanced over the papers, his brow furrowing. This is substantial. Yes, Ruth said calmly. And every one of those payments was voluntary, with no repayment ever made. The petitioner's sudden concern for her mental state coincides directly with her decision to stop these transfers. The courtroom fell silent. Ethan shifted again, his voice barely audible. That's not fair. Fair? I said, my voice rising. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been seeing my son call me once just to say he loves me, not just when he needs rent. The judge raised a hand. Mrs. Reynolds, please stay composed. I took a deep breath, nodded, and sat down. Ruth turned toward the judge one final time. Your Honor, my client recently underwent a full cognitive assessment by her physician. We've submitted the report. Her mental faculties are excellent for her age. There's no medical basis for this petition, she paused. But there is evidence of coercion and financial exploitation. We request that the court dismiss the petition immediately and place a temporary restraining order preventing further contact intended to manipulate or harass Mrs. Reynolds. The judge reviewed the report for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan and Lena. Mr. Reynolds, he said slowly, you claim to be protecting your mother. Yet you've presented no medical evidence, only subjective concerns, all while benefiting from her finances. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. The judge leaned forward. This court does not exist to enforce guilt or entitlement. Mrs. Reynolds appears perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. Petition denied. Lena's face drained of color. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. And, the judge continued, further attempts to interfere with your mother's assets may result in criminal charges. He banged his gavel once. Case dismissed. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Outside the courtroom, Ruth squeezed my hand. You did beautifully. You didn't lose control once, but when I stepped into the sunlight, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Because even though I had won, I had lost something I'd never get back. The illusion that my son still loved me. Ethan called after me in the parking lot. Mom, wait! I turned. Please, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want it to go this far. Lena, she pushed me into it. Lena glared at him. Don't you dare put this on me. For a second, their perfect little alliance cracked wide open. I stared at them both. No, Ethan, you made your choices. You picked your side. And with that, I walked away. Behind me, their voices rose, sharp, angry, accusing. By the time I reached my car, they were shouting at each other. I didn't look back. That night, for the first time in years, I lit a candle by my husband's photo. I did it, Robert, I whispered softly. Our son's grown up, but not the way we hoped. Still, I think you'd be proud. I finally stood up for myself. The flame flickered gently. And for a moment, I almost felt him there, steady, silent, proud. And as the candle burned low, I realized something simple. Something freeing. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go before it destroys you. After the court dismissed their petition, I expected peace. But peace doesn't come easily when greedy hearts lose control. 3 days later, my phone began buzzing again. Unknown numbers, blocked callers, hang-ups. Then a letter slid under my door. No stamp, no name, just one line scrawled in blue ink. Enjoy your victory, old woman.
It won't last. I didn't need a signature. The handwriting, the curved L, the sharp R, was unmistakable. Lena. For a moment I felt the old tremor of fear. Then it passed, because this time I had documentation, allies, and the one thing she couldn't counterfeit: community. That afternoon I walked to the small cafe near my bakery where people still greeted me by name. "Mrs. Reynolds!" "The usual caramel latte?" the barista called. "Yes, please." As I waited, I overheard two women whispering near the window. "Did you see the courthouse news? That lady who sued her own mom for money, what's her name? Lena something? Yeah, can you believe it? Poor mother." They didn't know they were talking about me, but it didn't matter. The truth was spreading on its own, quietly and cleanly, the way justice sometimes does, without screaming. When I returned home, I found Ethan sitting on my porch steps. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders rounded, eyes tired. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then opened the door. Inside, he stared at his hands. "I left Lena." I froze. "What?" "She's been lying to me about everything. The money, the threats, even the court papers. She said you'd signed something years ago. She forged it. When I confronted her, she told me I was useless without her." He rubbed his face. "She took my car, Mom, even emptied our joint account." I sat across from him, silent. For years, I had dreamed of hearing my son apologize. Now that moment had come, but it felt strangely hollow. "Ethan," I said finally, "you were old enough to know right from wrong." He nodded. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. But I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked at him, the boy who once built me Mother's Day cards out of macaroni and glue. "I'm not ready to forgive," I admitted, "but I am ready to start again, if you mean it." He nodded, tears glistening. 2 weeks passed. I thought the storm had ended until the local newspaper called. "Mrs. Reynolds," the reporter said, "we're doing a piece on elder financial abuse. Someone sent us court documents showing your case. Would you like to share your story publicly?" My first instinct was to refuse. I didn't want to relive it. But then I remembered Lena's note. It won't last. Yes, I thought, it will, because I'll tell it myself. So I invited the reporter over, brewed coffee, and showed her everything. Bank statements, emails, the forged signatures, the recordings Ruth had gathered. When the article published, it went viral in our county. Headline: "Mother outsmarts couple trying to steal her savings." Comments flooded the online post. Good for her. That daughter-in-law deserves jail. Every parent should protect themselves. For once, the internet's noise was on my side. The next morning, my bakery was busier than ever. People came not just for pastries, but to shake my hand. "You gave all of us hope," a gray-haired woman told me. "My own son keeps asking for money. I think it's time I learned to say no," I smiled. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. But not everyone was cheering. A week later, Ruth called. "Lena's filed for bankruptcy," she said. "She owes more than $80,000 in credit cards and business loans." I didn't answer right away. Somewhere deep inside, the kind part of me, the mother, the nurturer, felt pity. But then I remembered her smirk in court, her letters, her manipulations. Pity faded into peace. "She made her choices," I said simply. One evening, Ethan returned again. He had found a small job at a local hardware store, was renting a room, and looked, finally, humble. He placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" "Money," he said quietly. "My first paycheck. I want you to have part of it. Consider it rent for all those years I didn't pay." I pushed it back. "No, Ethan, you keep it. What I want from you isn't money, it's honesty." He smiled sadly. "That's harder to earn, Mom, but I'll try." A few nights later, I sat on the porch, the cool autumn air brushing my face. The stars were bright, scattered like sugar across black velvet. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the court, the humiliation, and the slow, steady rebuilding. And I realized something I wished I'd known long ago. You can't control what others do with your kindness, but you can control when to stop giving it to the wrong people. The bakery now closes every evening at 6. At 7, I brew myself tea, turn off my phone, and watch the sunset. Sometimes Ethan joins me. Sometimes he doesn't. Either way, I'm content. One evening, he turned to me and asked, "Mom, do you ever regret cutting us off?" I looked at him, smiled softly, and said, "No, I regret not doing it sooner." He laughed quietly. "You're tougher than you look." "No, sweetheart," I replied. I just finally remembered who I was before the world convinced me I had to buy love. The wind rustled the trees, carrying away the last ashes of old pain. Somewhere, I could almost hear Robert's voice again, steady, calm, proud. "You did good, Juliet." The following weeks felt like the calm after a hurricane. The bakery's ovens still roared every morning. The scent of butter and sugar still floated through the street. But I had changed. Every batch I baked carried something new. Peace. Customers kept bringing up the article. "Mrs. Reynolds, you should write a book," a college girl said while paying for muffins. I laughed. "Sweetheart, life already wrote it for me." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Justice had been served, yes, but closure, real closure, rarely arrives on paper. One cloudy Thursday, Ruth called again. "There's news," she said. "Lena's company has been declared fraudulent. Several people filed complaints, fake investments, forged invoices, unpaid employees. It's all over local news." I turned on the TV, and there she was, Lena, standing outside the courthouse, wearing sunglasses large enough to hide behind. Reporters crowded her with microphones. "Ms. Reynolds, did you really forge financial documents?" No comment. "Did you scam your investors?" No comment. Her voice cracked on that second no. The camera zoomed in on her face. For the first time, she looked small. I didn't feel joy. Not even relief, just stillness. Ethan arrived that evening with 2 cups of coffee. He looked nervous. "Mom," he said quietly, "Lena called me." I put the cup down. "And?" "She wanted me to hide some money for her, cash she took from those fake investors." He rubbed his forehead. "I told her no. I told her she needs to face what she's done." I nodded. "That's the right choice." He looked up, eyes wet. "Mom, I want you to know, whatever happens to her, I don't blame you anymore. I used to think you ruined our lives, but now I see you saved mine." I reached across the table and took his hand. "No, Ethan, you saved your own. You finally stopped letting guilt guide you." 2 days later, police arrested Lena at her apartment. Fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. It made every local headline. I watched the footage in silence. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she looked around as if searching for someone to defend her. But this time, there was no one left. Ethan stood beside me, his shoulders tense. "I loved her once," he whispered. "I know," I said softly. "But love without respect always turns into chains." He nodded. "You were right all along." Weeks passed. Spring returned, and the bakery window bloomed with daffodils. Life began to look ordinary again, beautifully, mercifully ordinary. Then one afternoon a young woman entered the shop. She wore a beige coat and carried a notebook. "Mrs. Reynolds?" she asked shyly. "I'm Sarah from Good Morning Tennessee. We're doing a follow-up segment on resilience stories. Would you join us?" I hesitated, then smiled. Why not? The following week, a small camera crew arrived at my bakery. They filmed me kneading dough, greeting customers, and dusting sugar over pastries. When the interview began, Sarah asked, "If you could give one message to other parents who feel used or disrespected by their adult children, what would it be?" I thought carefully before answering. "Love doesn't mean funding someone's irresponsibility," I said. "Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing a parent can do. Because it forces the other person to grow or fall, and both are lessons," Sarah smiled. "That's powerful." The segment aired on a Sunday morning. The headline read, "The Mother Who Said No and Found Herself Again." Messages flooded my bakery's social media page. I needed this today. I finally cut off my toxic son. Thank you. You made me feel less alone. I never wanted fame. But maybe sharing my story helped someone avoid my pain. That thought alone was worth everything. One evening, I drove to the cemetery where Robert was buried. I hadn't been there since the court hearing. The sky was gold with sunset, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I knelt beside his grave, brushing the dust from the letters of his name. "Robert," I whispered, "I kept your promise. You told me once, Never let love become debt. I finally understand what you meant. A warm wind rustled the nearby trees, almost like a sigh of approval. I smiled. Your boy is learning too. He's not perfect, but he's trying. For a long time, I just sat there, watching the last light fade from the sky. When I returned home, Ethan was waiting on the porch, holding a small box. What's this? I asked. He handed it to me. Inside was a brand new keychain with a tiny engraved tag. Home isn't money. Home is you. I laughed, tears filling my eyes. Where did you find this? I had it made, he said, smiling. For all the times I forgot what really mattered. I hugged him. This time, there was no bitterness left, just warmth. That night, I lit one last candle for the past, for every tear shed, every dollar wasted, every heartbreak endured. And as the flame flickered softly, I whispered, "It's over now." Because the truth is, stories like mine don't end with revenge. They end with peace, the kind you earn when you finally stop apologizing for protecting yourself. 6 months later, the smell of cinnamon filled my bakery like a hymn. Business was good, but the real miracle was silence. No court dates, no phone threats, no reporters. Just the hum of the oven and the low whistle of the kettle. Ethan still came every morning at 7 a.m., sharp, apron half-tied, hair always messy. He wasn't just helping anymore, he'd become my partner. The customers loved him. "Your son's got your smile," they'd say, and for the first time, I believed it. One Tuesday, I noticed him staring at the new pastry display. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking of adding a special order shelf. People keep asking for sugar-free options." I raised an eyebrow. "You caring about health? That's new," he grinned. "I'm trying to be better, in more ways than one." Behind that grin, I saw growth, earned, not gifted. That evening, we locked up early. Outside, the sunset painted the shop windows gold. We sat on the front steps with 2 cups of cocoa. "Remember when I said I didn't deserve forgiveness?" Ethan began. "I remember," he exhaled. "I've been going to therapy. At first I thought it was pointless. But the counselor said something. You can't rebuild trust until you stop demanding it." That hit me. I don't want to demand anything anymore. I just want to be here if you'll let me. I squeezed his hand. "You already are." A passing breeze carried the faint chime of the old church bell downtown, the same bell that rang the day of his secret wedding. It no longer sounded like betrayal. It sounded like closure. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the Department of Justice. The defendant has pled guilty to fraud and forgery. Sentenced to 3 years with restitution to all victims. I read it twice, then folded it neatly. No joy, no hate, just the calm satisfaction of a door finally shut. That night, I slept 8 uninterrupted hours, the first in years. Spring turned to summer. The bakery walls, once lined with old receipts and worry, now held framed newspaper articles. Resilience in flour and sugar. A mother rebuilds. Tourists came by asking for photos. I always said yes, but only if they bought a croissant first. One day, a middle-aged woman approached the counter, holding a photo of her grown son. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, "your story saved us. I stopped paying my son's gambling debts. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but last week he found a job." I smiled. "Then both of you are free." Late that night, after Ethan left, I turned off the lights and stood in the glow of the ovens. Flour dust floated through the air like snow. I whispered into the empty room, "Robert, we did it." The dough timer beeped softly, almost like an answer. I took the last tray from the oven, perfect golden pastries, and set them to cool. Tomorrow, I'd donate half of them to the shelter downtown, because healing, I realized, isn't just about taking back what was stolen. It's about giving again, but wisely this time. On a Sunday morning, the town hosted a local fair. Ethan persuaded me to set up a booth. Our sign read, "Reynolds and Son Bakery, made with lessons and love." Kids lined up for cupcakes. Elderly couples lingered to talk. Midway through the day, a little girl tugged at my sleeve. "Ma'am," she asked, "why is it called Lessons in Love?" I knelt beside her and said, because every mistake can teach you something sweet. She giggled, hugged the cupcake, and ran off. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I looked at Ethan laughing with customers. The same boy who once chose greed now chose gratitude. I realized I had finally reached the ending I deserved. Not a fairy tale, but a life rebuilt from ashes and honesty. When we packed up, Ethan handed me a small folded note. Inside were 3 words in his uneven handwriting. "Thank you anyway." I looked at him, confused. He shrugged. "For loving me when you shouldn't have." That night, back home, I placed the note inside the old recipe book Robert and I had started 40 years ago. Between pages stained with sugar and coffee, the words felt safe, like the rest of my story. Then I turned off the light, stepped onto the porch, and watched fireflies dance across the dark yard. Life had come full circle. I had lost everything built on illusion, and gained everything built on truth. The next morning, a customer asked, "Mrs. Reynolds, what's your secret ingredient?" I smiled. Boundaries. Because sometimes the sweetest recipe is learning when to stop giving people who've already had enough of you. A year later, the bakery sign had faded slightly from sun and time, but I refused to repaint it. Every scratch on the gold letters Reynolds & Son told the truth of what we'd survived. Ethan and I worked side by side most days, but every now and then he disappeared for an hour during lunch. I never asked where, until one afternoon he walked in holding a small bouquet of white roses. "Who are those for?" I teased. He blushed. "Her name's Clara. She's a nurse at the shelter. She keeps ordering extra loaves to feed the volunteers, but I think she just likes talking." I laughed softly. "Then talk back, son. But do it with honesty this time." He nodded, serious. "That's all I've got now." For the first time since everything fell apart, I saw hope that wasn't fragile. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived, stamped Community Engagement Office. Inside was an invitation. "Mrs. Reynolds, we're honoring local citizens who inspire resilience. Please join us to share your story." At first, I almost said no. The bakery, the deliveries, my nerves, all good excuses. But Ethan insisted. "Mom, people need to hear what you went through. You taught me boundaries save lives." So I went. The event was held in the old theater downtown. When my name was called, I stepped onto the small stage, lights warm on my face. My hands trembled, but then I saw Ethan smiling from the front row. I took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I began. I thought love meant never saying no. But love without limits becomes a cage. I lost everything trying to keep the peace, and found peace only when I stopped losing myself. The room was silent, then filled with applause that felt like forgiveness. Afterward, people hugged me, told me about their own stories. Sons, daughters, spouses who'd taken too much. I realized something huge. My pain had become a bridge. Within months, local churches and women's centers asked me to speak. Ethan helped design flyers that read, "Boundaries are love," a talk by Mrs. Reynolds. We even started donating a portion of bakery profits to a small fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. Every speech ended the same way. You can forgive someone without financing their mistakes. The first time I said that, a woman in the crowd burst into tears and whispered, "Thank you." I went home that night and slept deeper than ever before. Clara began visiting the bakery often. Always cheerful, hair tied messily under a nurse's clip. One evening she stayed after closing to help wash trays. Ethan watched her like a man seeing daylight after years underground. I leaned against the counter, smiling. "Careful, you'll burn the cookies if you stare too long," he grinned. "Guess I'm finally learning the recipe." A few months later, he proposed quietly. No secrets, no lies. He came to me first with a trembling voice. "Mom, I want you there. Front row, always." I hugged him. "Then this time, I'll bring the cake myself." The church smelled of lilies and vanilla. As Clara walked down the aisle, sunlight spilled through stained glass, bathing everything in gold. Ethan's eyes met mine, steady, grateful. When the vows ended, the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," and the crowd erupted in gentle laughter and applause. I caught myself crying, but these tears tasted different. Sweet, not bitter. After the ceremony, Clara approached me. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said softly,
Thank you for trusting me with your son. I squeezed her hands. Just promise me you'll both remember, partnership isn't ownership, she smiled. Deal. Back at the bakery, life settled into new rhythms. The mornings began with laughter instead of silence. Ethan and Clara handled catering requests while I taught weekend classes to teenagers learning baking for the first time. Sometimes I'd catch myself watching them, feeling a quiet awe. People said time heals, but I learned that boundaries heal faster. One evening, after a long day, I stepped outside to lock up and saw the reflection of our sign in the window. Behind it, Ethan and Clara were joking over dough, flour on their faces like snow. For the first time in forever, the picture looked complete. The bell above the door jingled. A young couple entered, holding hands, nervous. Mrs. Reynolds, the woman said, we're getting married next week. Could you make our cake? We read your story online, I smiled. Of course. But tell me what flavor? The man grinned. Whatever says starting over, I thought for a moment. Vanilla, I said finally. Simple, honest, hard to fake. They laughed. And I started writing the order. That night, while cleaning up, I looked at the empty tables and whispered, Robert, I wish you could see him now. The wind outside rattled the door softly, almost like a chuckle. I turned off the lights, leaving one oven lamp glowing, the same warm amber that had seen us through every chapter. Grief, betrayal, justice, and renewal. 10 years later, the bakery still smelled of cinnamon, butter, and second chances. The gold lettering on the window had faded into a soft bronze. Inside, laughter and the rhythm of mixers filled the room where silence used to live. I was no longer behind the counter every day. Ethan and Clara now ran the place together. He handled the ovens, she handled the books, and between them bloomed a calm I once thought impossible. Every Friday morning I arrived early, only to sit at my old table by the window. A mug of cocoa in hand, I'd watch the town wake up the same way I once watched it fall asleep in grief. Sometimes customers recognized me. Mrs. Reynolds, you're the story lady, aren't you? I'd smile. Once I was a lesson. Now I'm just a customer. One afternoon, Ethan called me into the kitchen. On the stainless steel counter sat an envelope tied with red ribbon. What's this? I asked. He grinned. Your retirement papers, I laughed. You're firing me. Promoting you, he said, placing a small bronze key in my palm, the key to the old oven. We had it restored and renamed. Look, he pointed to the engraved plate above the dial. Juliet Oven, first flame of home. My throat tightened. Ethan, that's too much, he shook his head. No, it's exactly what you gave us, heat without burning. That evening, I sorted through mail and found an envelope from a correctional facility. Inside was a letter in slanted handwriting. Mrs. Reynolds, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you thanks. Your testimony helped others escape people like me. I'm learning how to cook in the prison kitchen. First thing we bake is bread. The instructor says kneading is therapy. Lena Reynolds' I read it twice and set it beside the window. Not to forgive, but to let go. The documentary crew a month later, a local TV station filmed a short documentary on our bakery. The reporter asked, "What's the secret to your success?" Ethan smiled. My mother taught me the formula. 1 part love, 1 part boundaries, and a pinch of forgiveness for taste. When the segment aired, customers sent letters from every state. One from Ohio simply read, "Your story made me call my mom again." That one I framed. Years rolled on. Clara and Ethan had a daughter, little Rosie, who carried the same mischievous spark Ethan once had. She spent afternoons dusting flour on the counter, pretending to be Grandma's assistant. One evening, I took her to the field behind the house where wild daisies grew. She asked, "Grandma, how do you make people love you again when they hurt you?" I looked at the sun setting over the hills. "You don't," I said gently. "You learn to love yourself so much that it doesn't matter if they don't." She nodded, as if understanding a truth she would remember forever. On the 20th anniversary of the bakery, Ethan and Clara organized a town celebration. Banners hung across Main Street. Musicians played folk tunes. Children ran with cupcakes in their hands. When it was my turn to speak,
I looked at the crowd and saw faces that once only knew me as that woman from the scandal. Now they knew me as the woman who stayed. I used to think my story ended with betrayal, I told them. But it didn't. It ended with rebirth. Because forgiveness is not about letting someone back in, it's about letting yourself out. The applause rose like the sound of waves. Clara handed me a small cake decorated with words in icing, to the woman who turned ashes into flour. That night, I locked the bakery door for the last time. The street was quiet except for the flicker of the neon sign. I set the oven key on the counter, wrote a note, and left it for Ethan. The first flame is yours now. Keep it warm, never hot. And when you bake, remember, every crust needs space to rise. Outside, the wind smelled of sugar and rain. I walked home under the streetlights that once witnessed my grief. Now they lit the path of my peace. In the living room, I opened my old recipe book and tucked the oven key inside. Then I added one last entry in the margin, beneath Robert's handwritten notes from decades ago. Final recipe: 1 cup of courage, 2 cups of boundaries, and a lifetime of gratitude. I closed the book, turned off the light, and sat by the window as dawn painted the sky a soft peach. For the first time, there was no anger left in me, no fear, no regret, only a quiet whisper, "Thank you, life, for letting me rise again." Fade out. 25 years later, the old bakery still stood at the corner of Willow and Pine, its bricks softened by time and sunlight. The gold lettering had worn away, but the smell of vanilla still drifted through the air like a memory refusing to fade. I'm Rosie Reynolds. Yes, that Reynolds. The bakery is mine now. People come from other towns just to take selfies where the strongest woman in our county once baked bread. That woman was my grandmother, Juliet Reynolds. When I was little, I thought the stories about her were fairy tales. The mother who forgave but never forgot. The widow who turned betrayal into a business. But it wasn't until I found her journal that I realized none of it was fiction. It happened last month while renovating the attic. Under a pile of flour-stained aprons, I found a wooden box tied with a blue ribbon. Inside was her old recipe book, the same one she'd always guarded like a treasure chest. Between the yellowed pages, there were notes not written in measurements, but in feelings. Add courage when life tastes bitter. Stir patience until forgiveness rises. Bake with boundaries, not bitterness. And then a folded letter addressed to me, "Dear Rosie, if you're reading this, I'm long gone, but my story still breathes inside these walls. People will tell you I was strong. They'll forget to tell you I was scared first. Remember, strength isn't what you start with. It's what's left after you refuse to give up." Her handwriting trembled at the edges, but every word hit like sunlight. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I opened my laptop, turned on the small ring light my generation never travels without, and pressed record. "Hi," I said, staring into the camera. "I'm Rosie Reynolds. My grandmother survived betrayal, rebuilt her life, and taught me that forgiveness and fire can share the same oven. I'm here to tell you her story." I read passages from her journal, showed the oven key, the framed newspaper articles, even the first mixing bowl still dented from decades of use. By dawn, the video was done. I uploaded it without expectations. By nightfall, the internet had found it. Hundreds of comments poured in. "I watched this crying with my mom. Your grandma reminds me of my aunt who raised me. This isn't a story. It's therapy." One comment, though, stopped me cold. "I was in that courthouse 25 years ago. Your grandmother gave me courage to walk out on my abuser." "Thank you for telling her story," I cried. The kind of cry that feels like cleansing, salt water washing dust from the soul. A week later, I hosted a community gathering at the bakery. People came carrying copies of the article, photos, and oddly enough, handwritten recipes they wanted to share. We placed them all in a large glass jar labeled the Hope Mix. When it was my turn to speak, I stood where Grandma's counter once stood. The same spot where she'd taught me to knead dough with patience. "I used to think this place smelled like sugar," I said. "But it actually smells like survival." The crowd laughed softly, but many eyes glistened. I never met the woman who hurt her or the man who betrayed her. but I don't need villains to understand victory. Grandma taught me that justice isn't revenge, it's peace that stays. Applause rolled through the room like a heartbeat. Within months, our bakery mailbox overflowed. People sent postcards with confessions and thanks. I left a toxic marriage after your grandmother's story. I forgave my dad for abandoning us. I started therapy. Ethan? My dad watched from the counter, older now, hair silver, eyes gentler. He said, "She would have been proud, Rosie, not just of the bakery, but of the way you turned her pain into light." I smiled. She taught us how. On the anniversary of her passing, I filmed one more video, the finale, I called it. I stood beside the same oven that bore her nameplate, Juliet Oven, First Flame of Home. Behind me, the shelves were filled with loaves from every recipe she'd ever written. "Grandma," I said into the lens, "the world finally knows your story. But here's something you never got to hear. We're okay now." I paused, letting the camera capture the soft hum of the oven, the glow of the coils. "You taught us that we don't need to be perfect to be worthy of peace." "You were right, Grandma. Boundaries really are love." I turned off the camera but kept recording audio. The hiss of bread baking, the slow exhale of the timer, the sound of life continuing. Today, Reynolds & Son Bakery is still open. But now there's a small corner shelf labeled Juliet's Journal. We keep printed copies of her letters there. Customers take one, leave a coin, and we donate it to shelters that help families escape abuse. When I look at those letters, I no longer see pain. I see a woman who dared to rebuild when her world collapsed. A woman who taught generations that rising isn't just for dough. I end every closing shift the same way she did. I wipe the counter clean, switch off the lights, and whisper into the warm air, "Thank you, life, for letting us rise again." Then I lock the door, step outside, and let the night carry her story wherever it's needed next. Fade to black.